Hi, and welcome to another Bible study. And today we are going over Genesis 7 through 8. And this is the second flood story. The first one can be found in Genesis 6. This is the second one. And at the very end of Genesis 8, we're going to find God's promises for the earth. We've got a couple of writers in this, with Genesis 7, 1 through 5, and then chapter 8, verses 20 through 22, we're looking at the J writer, the Yahwehist, which is that tradition that is being written 10th, 9th century BCE during the early monarchy, King David, King Solomon. It's very much the point of the writers during that time. It keeps talking about human trial and failure and the human attempt to play God and the inevitable failures in that result. With the other pieces that we're reading today, we're going to have the P writer. Most of what we're reading is the P, the priestly tradition, and that is chapter 7, starting with verse 6 through 8:19. And a reminder of those characteristics of the priestly writer is that they are detailed to traditions, ceremonies. It's a particular way of ordering life around sacrifices, festivals, days, ritual purity. And the priestly writer is all about ensuring survival of the people. They are concerned with the correct way of living. And the goal for the priestly writer happens because of the time period it's being written in. The goal is to help the Israelites in exile to deal with the insecurities of exile and to respond to that loss of liberty by providing some certainty. And the P writer, just that reminder, okay, we're in exile, the Babylonian exile. So we're looking at dates between 550 and 450 BCE. So quite a separation between when J is being written and when P is being written. In looking at the flood story and different aspects, we get a tiny bit of geography mentioned. And so how can we kind of understand what gets mentioned in the biblical text and where is that today? So it states that the ark is going to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And this refers to a whole range of mountains. And the word Ararat is Hebrew, is a Hebrew version of the word of a Akkadian word Urartu, which refers to the land and the kingdom of the mountainous region around Lake Van in eastern Anatolia. The name Urartu is found in the Akkadian records, like 13th, 6th centuries BCE. What's important is this mountain range. It's like the tallest in the Near East. And so that's why it is suitable then to understand why the ark comes to rest there. And that the tallest mountain in that range, called Massus by the Armenians, Argdag by the Turks, is roughly 17,000 feet tall and is in modern times called Mount Ararat. So just some kind of, do we know exactly if that's where the ark rested? No, we do not. But we can understand the geography and how that's playing into this and why the mountain range is so important. So again, I've stated this before in previous times, we're not quite to the point of there's nothing to definitively prove or disprove the flood story in a particular way. We talked a little bit about last week in Genesis 6, how there is a theory out there based upon whether that's archaeological evidence, it's based upon population shifts, that there is a theory that there was a substantial flooding around the Black Sea region. And you can listen to that episode further, and that may have led to all of the creation of these different flood stories, because it's not only the Hebrew Bible that has a flood story, but we also find flood stories with the Babylonians. We get the Gilgamesh epic, we get the Atreus myth, but we also get flood stories in other civilizations, in other cultures, all over the world. And so it's kind of interesting to be going, all right, so something significant seems to have happened. And then how does it get passed down? How does it get talked about? Some interesting things to note in the particular passage looking at today. Noah's age at this event is 600 years, and it may have some significance in the context of, all right, the number 600 It's part of the Mesopotamian mathematics. Noah's age equals 1 Babylonian Ur, a mathematical unit. The Akkadian word can signify 600, or also by extension, all totality. So we can think of that, of all totality before the flood. Noah has lived, and now Noah is going to live a different life, totality. The onset of the flood in verse 11 is very much announced in formal language, and we can think of just as God has separated the waters in the creation story of Genesis 1, which is also written by the priestly tradition, that now God undoes that separation. God removes that separation, and here it comes. And so where in Genesis 1 it talks about the end of chaos, God brought created out of chaos. Now a second chaos is happening with the world, and that the flood waters represent a reversion of what has been created. We also get the paired image of waters pouring down from above and waters surging up from the deeps. We can find this in the Traeus myth, where the final deluge, the storm god Adad is commanded to bring about a drought by withholding his waters. In P, the unleashing of this celestial and subterranean waters, the allowing of the chaos brings catastrophic cosmic catastrophe. So this is large, this is big. Now, there are different, when we're reading through, if we're very careful about reading, we may know that it kind of almost repeats itself. We see this in verse 17 and then in verse 24. But it's because they belong to different writers. So even though we kind of get a segment where this is mostly the J tradition, this is mostly the P tradition, we do get pieces here where like verse 17 belongs to the J tradition, verse 24 belongs to the P tradition. So it's just kind of something to be aware of as you're reading through. When we get to verse 20, the floods reach a height of 15 cubits above the mountains. So the ark, which is 30 cubits in height, can come to rest on them. And that 15 cubits is thought to be like 23 feet. And then with verse 24, the detail of the reality effect of it all, the duration of the flood complements its vast extent. It's a massive catastrophe in space and time. So if we're thinking about, man, that's a lot of days as we're reading through. So not only does it cover a vast amount of space, but it's also taking up a vast amount of time. And then when we get to chapter 8, the 8:1 is the Hebrew Bible, the act of remembering, like God remembers. And it's interesting because the actions come because of the remembrance. It's not simply cognitive, like God's remembrance of Noah and the animals motivates God into salvific saving action of sending wind to dry the flood waters. And so this remembrance results in making the flood subside, and a process that mirrors the waters that earlier rose slowly. Now the waters recede slowly. And that sense of, all right, there is a recognition of the remembrance, and then the attention going to Noah and applying that decision, that it's not just simply thinking something, but it also results in doing something. And so we find God remembering, cognitive, but then absolutely moving into action form. The raven that gets sent out, the raven is an unclean bird, so something to keep in mind. Whereas the dove is something that it brings back the olive branch, and that comes to symbolize peace. And that the dove actually is also known to have habitats with humans. And so it's understood as being more domesticated. And it's just kind of interesting how that relationship between humans and animals, and that closer relationship with a dove, results in the dove coming back and bringing peace. Also of note is that the passage of time, there's very clear, like, okay, this is important. The only date that is clear at all is the first day of the first month when the water dries up. And this is the first day of the new year, which corresponds to the day when the tabernacle is completed. You can read it in Exodus 41 and 17. And then God's glory descends on in the tabernacle in Exodus 40:34. So it's kind of interesting that we get this important days of the first day of the month. And there is, with Noah, there is dry land. There is something new that has now been created. Whereas with Exodus, we get something new that's been created, which is the tabernacle. And it also corresponds, of course, to the first day of creation in Genesis 1. 7, which we hear about often in this reading, is a number of wholeness or completion, and the repetitions of the number may carry that sense throughout the story. So it's like, all right, there is wholeness, there is completion when we get that number 7. And then another clear implication of the chronology is that the priestly tradition, used a calendar with 30 days to a month, such that 150 days, so from the 17th day of the second month, and then the 17th day of the seventh month equals 5 months. And this indicates that P is following the so-called administrative or schematic calendar that was commonly used in Mesopotamia, administrative and astrological text. And so the schematic calendar has 12 months of 30 days, which equals 360 days in a year, which of course we know the solar calendar, which is what we go by now, has 365 days. And so there may be something also relevant with talking about the 17th day of the seventh month is 1 week after the Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur, which occurs on the 10th day of the seventh month, according to Leviticus 16:29. And so the repetition of sevens may be more resonant. The seventh month may echo the seventh day of creation. So something also to kind of tie in on which God ceases to work. And so it's kind of interesting how the Noah story in the priestly tradition begins to connect back to the priestly tradition story of creation in Genesis 1. In chapter 8, verse 5, it takes 2 months and 2 weeks, so 74 days from the water's highest point on 7/17 until the first signs of the earth appear on the first day of the 10th month. And so this is almost half of the 150-day period of the floodwaters rise. And that date of the first day of the 10th month does not have any obvious significance that we know about, except that the first of the month, the new moon, is an occasion for sacrifice and feasting. So it may be related to that. In verse 7, we get that the raven is an unclean bird, most likely belongs to the P source, because the priestly tradition is very concerned with what is clean and what is not clean. And the ravens were never domesticated like the doves were. Like I said earlier about the doves, were domesticated, make their habitats amongst humans. And then we get this kind of interesting parallel between the flood story and one of the other flood stories, like in Gilgamesh, where the Mesopotamian flood hero dutifully builds a window in the ark, sound familiar, and releases a dove, which is parallel to Gilgamesh. And so it's kind of interesting how we get Noah in this flood story being the hero who builds the window, releases the dove, and then is connected to the Gilgamesh story. With is the report from the birds. I mean, that's kind of interesting, but it's the command God finally gives to leave the ark, that they do not leave the ark until God gives that command. And it can be connected back to Genesis 1, where to be fertile and become numerous. With verses 15 through 19, the departure from the ark is framed by God's command, leave the ark, and its fulfillment. And so they do. They leave and begin their life now in this new world. So what are some things that the text is trying to convey? Well, it's trying to tell us some important things about God, how God creates, destroys, judges, saves, and remembers. The story teaches us that God changes. We hear that multiple times in this story that God changes. And then with God, even global catastrophes are followed with saving grace and hope for a renewed creation, that destruction is not the end. It's also kind of interesting that the text tries to convey that humans did not change. Humans still have a propensity for evil and doing awful things to one another, but the unchangeable God did change, and that humans will hopelessly continue to imagine evil in their hearts. Nevertheless, God resolves not only to not wipe them out, but that it will be an intimate relationship between God and humans. So God transforms God's self into a God of long suffering, patience, and endless mercies. And so that we can take comfort in the faithfulness of a God of life who promises not to abandon us because of the evil imaginations contrived in our hearts. So we will not be left alone to our own devices, that God absolutely continues to show up and to love and to redeem us. And so we can think of the purpose here as revealing something of God's personality. So my hope is that going through this second story of the flood is kind of helpful and interesting. And before I begin reading, just a note, I am going to read through Genesis 7 and continue through Genesis 8. So beginning with Genesis 7. The Lord said to Noah, "Go into the ark with your whole household, because amongst this generation I've seen that you are a moral man. From every clean animal take 7 pairs, a male and his mate, and from every unclean animal take 1 pair, a male and his mate. And from the birds in the sky as well take 7 pairs, male and female, so that their offspring will survive throughout the earth. In 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. I will wipe off from the fertile land every living thing that I have made." Noah did everything the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters arrived on earth. Noah and his sons, his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark to escape the floodwaters. From the clean and unclean animals, from the birds and everything crawling on the ground, 2 of each, male and female, went into the ark with Noah, just as God commanded Noah. After 7 days, the floodwaters arrived on the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day, on that day, all the springs of the deep sea erupted, and the windows in the skies opened. It rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. That same day, Noah and his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's wife and his sons' 3 wives, went into the ark. They and every kind of animal, every kind of livestock, every kind that crawls on the ground, every kind of bird. They came to Noah and entered the ark, 2 of every creature that breathes. Male and female of every creature went in, just as God had commanded him. Then the Lord closed the door behind them. The flood remained on the earth for 40 days. The waters rose, lifted the ark, and it rode high above the earth. The waters rose and spread out over all the earth. The ark floated on the surface of the waters. The waters rose even higher over the earth. They covered all the highest mountains under the sky. The waters rose 23 feet high, covering the mountains. Every creature took its last breath. The things crawling on the ground, birds, livestock, wild animals, everything swarming on the ground, and every human being. Everything on dry land with life's breath in its nostrils died. God wiped away every living thing that was on the fertile land, from human beings to livestock to crawling things to birds in the sky. They were wiped off the earth. Only Noah and those with him in the ark were left. The waters rose over the earth for 150 days. God remembered Noah, starting in chapter 8. God remembered Noah, all those alive, and all the animals with him in the ark. God sent a wind over the earth so that the waters receded. The springs of the deep sea and the skies closed up. The skies held back the rain. The waters receded gradually from the earth. After 150 days, the waters decreased. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day, the ark came to rest on the Ararat Mountains. The waters decreased gradually until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the mountain peaks appeared. After 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. He sent out a raven, and it flew back and forth until the waters over the entire earth had dried up. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters on all the fertile land had subsided. But the dove found no place to set its foot. It returned to him in the ark, since water still covered the entire earth. Noah stretched out his hand, took it, and brought it back into the ark. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out from the ark again. The dove came back to him in the evening, grasping a torn olive leaf in its beak. Then Noah knew that the waters were subsiding from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent out the dove, but it didn't come back to him again. In Noah's 601st year, on the first day of the first month, the waters dried up from the earth. Noah removed the ark's hatch and saw that the surface of the fertile land had dried up. In the second month, on the 27th day, the earth was dry. God spoke to Noah. Go out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you all the animals of every kind, birds, livestock, everything crawling on the ground, so that they may populate the earth, be fertile and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out of the ark with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. All the animals, all the livestock, all the birds, and everything crawling on the ground came out of the ark by their families. Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took some of the clean large animals and some of the clean birds and placed entirely burned offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing scent, and the Lord thought to himself, I will not curse the fertile land anymore because of human beings, since the ideas of the human mind are evil from their youth. I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. As long as the earth exists, seed time and harvest, cold and hot, summer and autumn, day and night will not cease. May your day be blessed.